I'm here representing City Lights Bookstore as we introduce Mary Joyce, who has worked on 2 major metropolitan newspapers as a writer, artist, columnist, and feature editor, and has written 4 other books. She has spoken about Cherokee Little People on ABC TV in Nashville and Fox TV in Greenville. She also has been a guest on national radio programs, including Coast to Coast AM, which has an audience of 3 million. With that, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Okay. All right, you really almost... First of all, thank you for coming. It's a beautiful day. It's December. There's plenty of other things to be doing, and I appreciate you making the effort to be here. It's really wonderful. I also, even though they're not in the room, I want to thank both Chris and it's Cole, right?
Yep.
And Ian, and they run the bookstore. And so they try to make books come alive, and I'm going to try to make this one come alive for you. I hope this will be the best Sunday school class you've had in a long, long time. The short title of the book is Tangible Evidence of Jesus. The long title is Tangible Evidence of Jesus Left Behind for Us to Find. This book was inspired in a very unexpected and out-of-this-world way, and for that reason, I want to just expand just a little bit on my background so you'll understand where I'm coming from. I've worked for several Fortune 500 companies. As he mentioned, I've worked for 2 metropolitan newspapers as a writer, an artist, Sunday magazine editor, and feature editor. I've also worked for a college and a big city air pollution control agency. And the reason I mention that is because the person back then would not believe what I'm about to tell you now. So with that preface, I will tell you how this book came to be. On October 5th in 2013, last year, I was awakened in the middle of the night, or early morning, by Jesus. And you can see why that doesn't fit my background. And he wanted a book done. And he wanted it to tell more of his story, because there's so little of his story in the Bible. He also wanted the book to be very condensed, very to the point, with lots of pictures. Why? Because he said most people are too busy to read big, thick books, and they need the pictures to keep their attention and keep their interest. You want to... Now, he also wanted the book done in a month's time. Now, that is totally daunting, and I'm going, you gotta be kidding. The only thing that made it possible was my newspaper background, because I know how to write under deadline, and I know how to condense things and fit them into a small space. The other thing was I had unwittingly done much of the research. Not because I wanted to write a book, but because I felt like there must be more to this man Jesus than what we see in the Bible. With that, we'll get right into some of the archaeological things that are in the book. In ancient times, when a building was destroyed or a city was destroyed, nobody came along and hauled the debris away. They smashed it down, covered it up, and built some more. So Old Jerusalem, from the days of Jesus, is really way below the ground, or at least most of it. Of course, archaeologists know this. And one archaeological team got permission to dig at the execution site that the Romans had set up outside the Old Jerusalem walls. And what they did was they dug straight down like this until they hit remnants of man-made stuff. And once they did that, they started digging out this way. They uncovered a building that was approximately 22 feet by 40 feet. And within that foundation, there were some very interesting things. Number one, there was a baptismal bath. There was a trough for washing feet. And there were 4 crucifixion post holes. The way they were set up was there were 3 of them in a row like this at the front of this building. There was a 4th one that was 4 feet above that, right smack in the center. The way the Romans worked was they cut permanent post holes into solid bedrock so they could reuse the post holes. And they were approximately a foot square and 2 feet deep. So what they would do is when they had a crucifixion, they would put that cross into the post hole. When the crucifixion was over, they'd take it out and cover it with a stone lid or plug. And I'm going to show you a diagram. This was done quickly, but it'll give you the idea. This is the basic framework for what they found. These are the post holes. I don't know exactly where the other two items were, but one of the more interesting things, there was this huge disc that was made of stone, was more than 13 feet across and 2 feet thick, and it was the conclusion of the archaeologists that this was a first century chapel built around the crucifixion site. And that round disc was believed to be the cover that once covered the entrance to the nearby tomb where Jesus was laid right after the crucifixion. There was also a ledge. This rugged edge right here represents a cliff wall. And so one end of the church or the chapel had this stone wall. And that was an altar that was built into it. Now, believe it or not, there's a much more intriguing archaeological site that was also found outside the walls of Jerusalem. And this was a family tomb that was built into a hill, and it was very common during that time to bury people outside the city walls in these tombs that were built into hillsides. This one tomb was explored extensively, and many, many interesting things were found there. I need to explain the very peculiar burial customs during the time of Jesus. And the customs only lasted about 100 years. What they would do when somebody died is they'd take their body, put it inside one of these tombs, seal the tomb, and leave the body there for a year. Then they would go back, after there'd been plenty of time for all the soft tissue to disappear. They would collect the bones. And they would put the bones in a stone burial box. It's known as an ossuary. Each ossuary was a different size, depending on the length of the leg bone. It was only big enough to accommodate the femur or the thigh bone. So they would put all the bones in there, and then they would put a stone lid on it and put it into a burial niche. This is the only other diagram. This is basically how a family tomb was laid out. You would go in the entrance. This area was approximately 10 to 12 feet square. This is where the body would be laid out. And many times there was a ledge, like a bed, where the body would be placed for that year. Then afterwards, after they were put in the stone box, they would be put in one of these niches. The place of honor in these tombs was always to the right of the entrance. So the head of the family, or the most important person in the family, was placed here. The archaeologists found 3 ossuaries in this first niche. I'm going to give this to you all in English. It was originally written in another language. One was labeled Jesus, son of Joseph. One was labeled Mary, Mara. Now the spelling of Mary was different. It was the like endearing nickname for Mary. And I've seen it spelled out. I've never heard anybody say it. I don't know how to say it, but it was the nickname for Mary. And Mara was the feminine form of the word Lord. So here is a woman with a nickname and a title in the same niche with Jesus. Nicknames were not considered what you were supposed to do if you were a good Jew. You only had your proper name. Also, you would probably not be able to find another title with Mara after somebody's name. It gets more interesting. There was a third ossuary, and this one said, Judah, son of Jesus. It gets even more interesting. They did DNA testing between the Mary ossuary and the Jesus one. They found little bone fragments. Genetically, they were not related. So it was not the mother of Jesus, it was not a sister of Jesus. It gets more interesting. In one of the other niches, there was another ossuary with a nickname on it. And this one, again, as I said before, nicknames were not kosher. So here's a nickname, and in English it would have been Josie. Well, Jesus called his brother Joseph Josie. And so that is another link that this may very well have been the burial tomb of Jesus' family. It gets more interesting. About 200 feet away from that family tomb, there was another tomb. This one had all the indications that it was the burial tomb of a rich man. And inside the place of honor, in the right niche as you walk in the door, was another ossuary, totally unique, none other like it. And there was an inscription, or an etching, of a fish, and the fish was spitting out a man. This was the old Jonah story, and it was unique to be on that Jewish ossuary because the Jews said no images of people or animals on an ossuary. It's also interesting because Jesus used that image of Jonah and the whale to teach life after death. Okay, enough on that side. Let's jump on to something else. No, I'm not finished. It was clearly somebody who knows me too well is back there chuckling. Actually, I'll do a confession to you guys.
I have a quick question before you move down that.
Oh, question already? Jeez.
The brother, what did his DNA? Did his DNA
They
match?
haven't done that.
Oh,
As
okay.
of this moment, I don't know
Oh,
if that's been
I just
done.
was curious if it matched the Mary Mara.
It's a really good question. I'm sure the archaeologists want to have that done. It costs money and time to get some of those things done. But at least they did the two most significant ones. They also found evidence around these two tombs that they were built on the estate of a rich man. And if you know the Bible at all, at the time of the crucifixion, Joseph of Arimathea, who is described as a rich man, gave his tomb for the burial of Jesus. And Joseph of Arimathea, though he's only mentioned in the 4 Gospels during the time of the crucifixion, is actually in other records. He's in the records with the Eastern Church, which predates the Roman Church, and it said that Joseph of Arimathea was the uncle, or great-uncle, of Jesus. And at that time, they didn't have insurance policies. So when somebody died, one of the male leaders of the family took over the responsibility of the widow. So Joseph of Arimathea took care of Mary, the widow of Joseph the carpenter, and her children. Joseph of Arimathea was also in Roman records. He had a title that was considered above that of a senator, and he was a nobilis decurio, responsible for the 10 mines in southwestern England. And there are records, and I talk about this in the book, I won't get into it now, but there are records that Jesus traveled with his uncle to England, and there's evidence that he indeed was there. There's also evidence that he traveled into Tibet, and it comes from some very interesting, believable sources. Some people find it very difficult to believe that Jesus was married simply because typically the Roman Church said that he was celibate. Karen King, who is a professor of divinity at Harvard University, released some information in 2012 about a fragment, a parchment fragment that had been authenticated, and it had 7 lines on it. It had more than that, but those were the ones they could read, that indicated that Jesus was married. And the one line, line 4 of the 7, said, Jesus said to them, quote, my wife. It's also not commonly known that at the time of Jesus, a rabbi, which he was called, had to be married. And a man could not teach children unless he was married. So there's a lot of indications that he most likely was a married man. That was expected of that culture. And there are more than 80 times in the New Testament where Jesus calls himself Son of Man. That was the way of saying he was an ordinary man. Now, I'm not saying that he was ordinary. I do not mean that, but he definitely came to live as a human being. People are also very interested in the physical description of Jesus. And I touch on that at 2 places in the book. One is there is a translated letter written by Pontius Pilate and sent to Tiberius Caesar in Rome. Apparently, Jesus had caused quite a bit of an uproar, and Caesar wanted to know about him. So there's a description of Jesus according to Pontius Pilate. At another point in the book, I quote information from another archaeologist, and she studied the ancient Indian legends throughout the Western Hemisphere, South America, Central America, North America. And throughout all those tribes, they have legends of this man who sounds just like Jesus, to the point in some of the legends they talk about a hole in his wrist. Now, in many cultures, especially the old cultures, the forearm was considered part of the hand. Researchers are very well convinced that you could not put a crucifixion spike in the middle of the palm and support the body. But this was included as part of the hand in ancient cultures. These ancient legends predate the arrival of the white men with their missionary Christianity, and they describe this Jesus-type person always the same. And he taught stories that are found in the New Testament. For example, he talks about the little lost lamb. In South America, he talked about the little lost llama. Like I said, I'll just read the shortest of the descriptions of Jesus according to the Seri Indians. They marveled at his long white toga, his hair and beard gleamed with red lights, and his eyes the color of deep sea water. Pontius Pilate also described him as somebody who was much lighter in feature than the tawny people around him. So there's a similarity on both hemispheres. Evelyn, where's Evelyn? She's still in here, or she gave up her seat?
She's there.
Okay, she is the one who gets me out here doing this kind of thing. I'm mostly laid back and would prefer to be quietly writing at a computer, and she's the one that says you can't sit on this information, you have to get out and tell the world about it. So I assure you that without Evelyn, this information probably wouldn't be getting out like it should. And it has gotten out. I even got, as some of you may know, I got a handwritten letter from Jimmy Carter saying that he was very complimentary of the book. And it wasn't a form letter because he had written it on something at a random kind of way. It wasn't like a formal letter that somebody signed. So if it was interesting enough to intrigue the #1 Sunday school teacher in the country, then I figure it might be worth the rest of us taking a bit of time to look at it also. He, by the way, turned 90 in October, and he still teaches Sunday school. So, now, what I'm gonna do, because there's more information in my head than I can possibly have on these notes up here, and if any of you have some questions, I will try to answer them, but please know I am not an authority on biblical archaeology. I can, you know, all this information in the book has come from good sources, but if you start getting real deep, I'm not gonna be the expert that I wish I were. Anyhow.
I was just wondering what the source was for your information of the ossuaries.
That's pretty, in every chapter, I write down the name of the book, so that anybody who wants to dig deeper into it can find the book and do their own research. Some of these books I've waded through are like this, and you pull out the essence of it and then put it together in a condensed form, but some people want to dig deeper, and all the clues are there.
But what type of book was it? Was it like the professors?
Yeah, they're like done by archaeologists, done by scientists. There's a chapter on the authenticity of the Shroud of Turin, which has been debated over the years. And in this book, I focus on much of the microscopic evidence that was found. They found pollen, for example, that's only from that part of the world. So it wasn't like a European plant, so it was, you know, there's a lot of evidence like that. So if you're a researcher, I do leave the information for you to explore for yourself. Yes?
In general, are these sources recent or are they older sources?
A lot of this information is more recent than old. For example, when Karen King, the professor from Harvard, when she released her information, that was just in 2012. And some, I mean, these are more recent books. They're not, and for the most part, they're the work of.
So really, this information is more recent information. It's not been hidden away in volumes.
The information has been hidden away, like under the ground.
Well, under the ground,
And
yeah.
then people have more recently dug it up and found it. Okay? Anything else? Yes?
Yeah, I wanted to just make a comment. We were lucky enough to have Thanksgiving dinner with a professor of religion from Washington University in St. Louis, and he was talking about the ossuaries.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's, you know, respected, verifiable,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, there's
information.
actually
Yeah.
quite a few different sources. Do you know how recent his book is, any chance?
He's writing an encyclopedia.
Yeah,
of
see, that's what I was
religion
instructed to do.
Yeah.
He wanted it so that average people could read it. And like I said, I left sources so people can dig deep if they need to. Any other questions? Okay. I know there's a lot going on today. I know there's a parade, so I'm deliberately keeping this kind of tight. I would strongly suggest that you consider that book as a possible Christmas gift. It certainly would be timely, it certainly would be thought-provoking. I think it would also be great if, it would be a great book to spice up a Bible study class, because some of those get kind of predictable. And this would certainly get a discussion going.
Mary?
Yes?
Does your book give more detail about like your experience when he appeared to you? You talk. Like,
No, it doesn't. I'd be,
No.
you know,
Just,
what is it you wanted to know?
I was just wondering, like
I mean, I mentioned that it came
his
through that
physical
way.
appearance. Was it consistent with other accounts, or maybe you don't want
He has the lighter features.
the lighter feature?
And there is I'd have to, if you want to know about this, grab one of the cards and send me an email with the question, and I'll let you know exactly where it is. The website that we have has been going on since 2008. It gets updated about once a week. I forget where some of the stuff is. So if you have a real serious question, I'd be happy to scroll through it and find the answer for you and send it to you in an email. Anything else? All right.
Well, Jesus lived to be 33 or so, it said in the Bible, in most other sources. So you have him traveling to Britain, very young age, then to the Far East, like China. Then you have him traveling to Georgia, and all up and down the Mississippi River,
The legends that happened in this hemisphere
right?
apparently occurred after the crucifixion, because there are a number of indications of, of talking about the crucifixion wounds on his body. And there is a cave in Illinois, and that's too complicated a story to really get into, but there is a whole bunch of relics and carvings, and there are carvings of the crucifixion, and again, they show the hill, they show crosses, they show, the wound in the wrist of Jesus standing there. So there's a lot more in this book than what the size of the book would indicate.
So he arose and went to heaven after 3 days or in the Jerusalem area. So was he in body supposed to, per what you've written here, come back and manifest himself in Georgia?
Yeah, he can still manifest himself today. If he wants to,
But I'm
he's in
saying,
spirits,
that's
he
what
can,
you're saying.
And in the Western Hemisphere, he manifested after the crucifixion,
Okay,
all right?
I get it now.
Okay, and there, as you know, the Bible limits Jesus to his early childhood, and then we have a whole bunch of years before he reappears at the age of 30 in Jerusalem. He was not just sitting, making chairs. He was out doing things. And he was a very educated man, and he got some of his education in Britain, and most people don't know this, but the Druids were in Britain, and they were considered some of the smartest, most intellectual people in the world, and the Romans and the Greeks used to send their children to England to be educated by the Druids. The archaeological evidence that I have in the book talks about him being there with his uncle when he was a child. But there are other stories, which I do not mention in the book, that talk about him actually going there at an older age also. And people have the mistaken idea, since they didn't have cars, that people stayed in a very small area. It's simply not true. They traveled a great deal. There were regular routes that went to the Far East. The woman who started the Montessori schools in this country was one of the ones who went to Tibet. And when they were up at Hemis, the head librarian, after he found out he felt that these women could be trusted, came out and showed them what we would call like a scroll, but they called it a book, and said, there's evidence in here that your Jesus was here. And there was also a famous judge who made a tour through that part of the country. He also apparently saw that evidence. So there's some very interesting sources that confirm that he was also in Tibet. There's stories about him being in places like India, and I found too much conflicting information to include that in the book. I wanted it to only have information that I felt real comfortable in putting in there. But that is a possibility, I just can't confirm it. Yes?
I might speak to that briefly.
Okay.
There's a spiritual center in Myrtle Beach called the Maher Spiritual Center that I'm a member of and have been for over 30 years. And the founder of that center, Maher Baba, shared a lot of stories about Jesus. And I was present at times when college professors or people that were studying for their doctorate who had asked him about, stuff like this.
Right.
Exactly. And so there's several books in the library there at the Maher Spiritual Center written by very credible people. I'm not an intellectual myself, but I've been around that energy
Right.
and hear that talking, and it feels right to me.
Right.
And so, there's other books that have been out for years about Jesus being walking the Americas, lots of them.
Right. The one that I refer to in the book is called You Walk the Americas.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, that's my favorite too. And the woman spent 25 years studying these ancient legends.
Absolutely.
And it's
Very credible.
I think it's a very credible book.
I think
really
so.
do.
Well, you say that Jesus came to you kind of in a dream or some way, but generally it's thought of that he was the most unselfish and the most sinless person that ever existed.
Right.
And my question would be is why would he want, a mortal, why would he come in kind of I wouldn't say prideful way, but at least he wanted to communicate about himself in a publicity kind of way.
Yeah.
That kind of goes against,
No, that isn't
everything
the
else
reason,
that is
that
written
isn't the
about
reason he did it. There's a,
Let me show you something.
have I lost my book? No, I didn't. I'm only showing you this page right here because it lists all the books that were written, not all of them, the ones I could find that were written about Jesus. Only 4 of them made the Bible as we have today. There must be something else to say in these other books. And what happened was back in the 300s, Constantine got all the bishops together and they decided what was going to be in the Bible and what was going to be taken out of the Bible. And I think there were some deletions that shouldn't have happened. Jesus he's not looking for publicity. He wants people to know the truth. He wants them to know the complete picture. And he was an example of what the potential that's within each one of us.
Mm-hmm.
That's important, and we put ourselves down too much. And if you're fortunate, you've met people who've had a spiritual experience where they've been transformed and they essentially become almost like another person. The whole spiritual experience can change a person totally, even us common folk. And I think that's a very important lesson. I don't think it has anything to do with an ego on Jesus' part. I think he wants truth out there more than anything. Okay?
It's like we were talking once, Mary, about the book of Mary Magdalene and being these people that made the decisions of what under Constantine, that it was more male dominated,
Right.
and that they didn't want Mary to have any.
There were people among the disciples who didn't want the women to have any equal footing with Jesus. And Jesus had women disciples, more than the ones that are mentioned in the Bible. So, yeah. And there is a chapter, and when I say chapters, they're really tight and condensed. There's a chapter on that book that you're referring to, and it's supposed to be the oldest gospel. It's the gospel of, I'm going to get the wording wrong, it's like of the beloved, which is about Mary Magdalene. You'll see a whole lot of similarity with what you see in the Bible, but there's some added dimensions to it, and it's fascinating. And if nothing else, I hope that everybody here, if they haven't already, I hope that everybody will get a little bit more curious and dig into more of the whole story, because it's quite intriguing. It's not what they teach you in Sunday school. It's much more than that. Evelyn's also told me I probably should tell a little bit more about my background. My father was a pretty smart guy. He could read in Hebrew and Greek, and he was involved with translating the Revised Standard Version of the Bible. And he's the first one that got me thinking many, many years ago that you need to think beyond what's just put right there in front of you. He used to take us to different churches. He would take us to different religions or temples. He would take us so we would have a broad understanding of what the world is like. Anyhow, I just throw that out. Yes.
Do you mention Pistis Sophia text in your book? Are you familiar with Pistis
It's listed
Sophia?
in there under that page I showed you,
Yeah.
but I do not elaborate on it. Do you want to say something about it?
Yeah, just a little bit. It was a teaching that Jesus gave after he was resurrected, and I think it happened with his disciples in the Middle East over, I think it's about an 11-year period. And it's a teaching that he gives. And I mean, to me, after I read it, I became really offended that I mean, if the most sacred thing in Christianity is the resurrection of Jesus, why don't they give the teaching that he gave after he was resurrected. Wouldn't that be the most important thing?
And it's not included.
And it's not included.
Right.
And it's a beautiful teaching. It's a beautiful teaching about this heavenly being named Pistis Sophia. Pistis means faith, Sophia means wisdom. She has a fall into the darkness, and my understanding is that when Jesus, between his death and resurrection, he did go to hell and he went to heaven. And when he went to hell, he rescued her. This is the story of her redemption. Beautiful, it's beautiful, poetic. But in this, it's really interesting because there's like, 11 or so disciples that are in this whole journey with him through this teaching. And he'll be asking them questions about how does this part of the story relate to the Psalms of David. And Mary, being Mary Magdalene, speaks out a lot. And I think one of the male disciples, I think it was Peter.
Oh, Peter was pissed
fed
off
up.
at Mary all the time.
All the time.
He didn't want her having any credit at all.
Yeah.
He did not understand why Jesus was allowing this woman to have any part of what
Yeah.
he was doing.
And he
And yet
said-
the Roman church is built on Peter.
Yeah, and he's like, well, why don't you shut her up? And Jesus is like, I don't think so,
Yeah.
She has a voice at my table.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
it's a really good book to read.
right. Yeah. Thank you, appreciate you coming.
And will there be future books, or do you know? I'm talking about on this subject.
I don't know. I really don't know.
I mean, is there more that you're curious about that you're?
My curiosity doesn't have a turn-off switch. And I hope you all have your switches turned on too, because life is a lot more interesting when you do.
What is your supposition though about the Bible, the books of the Bible that were left out
Right.
deliberately?
Right.
That they didn't feel like needed to be in there?
Right?
Where are they?
Some of them still exist, and you can get what they call the apocryphal books. And if it says apocryphal books, don't assume that they're all in there, because I haven't found one that has them all in it. I've found them in different sources.
Do you find that there were a reasonable amount of female books of the Bible that were left out?
No, there was never, the Mary Magdalene would be probably the strongest one. And she clearly was a disciple. She clearly was very much a part of his teachings. Okay. Thank you very much for coming.